Once again to all of you. Hello and welcome to another CHIWORK conversation. I am Shadan Sadeghian from University of Zigen, and I'll be hosting this very interesting talk, which I'm looking forward to. And like every other conversation, we will be recording it, as you already recognize, the first part of it. And the first part of the conversation will be like, I will be talking with our speakers. Then there will be questions from your side. And for that, I would like to encourage you to, during the conversation, actually put your questions in the chat so we can see who has a question, and then we call your name so you can unmute yourself and just ask your questions on your own behalf. And speaking of unmuting yourself, please, if possible, turn on your cameras so we can see you and we can see your presence. But make sure your mics stay mute so we can just hear our speakers. And then I would start. Before I start, I would like to thank some people who make the whole event of HCI and Future Work possible and all of these conversations. First of all, our other technical program chairs, Max Wilson, Navina Karusala, Toby Lee, and Erin Soloway. And our student volunteers, Alberta Ansa, who is the assistant to our technical program chairs, Isabel Monos, who is our web chair, and also Nabil Al-Nain, who is our video chair and also accessibility co-chair. I should also thank National Science Foundation for partially funding this event. So, going to our conversation, I want to say, first of all, how did we come up with this topic? I went to Nordica 2 months ago and I was having a dinner with a nice beer. And I met Kıvanç there. And then I asked him what he's doing. And he says that he's doing music with AI. And then we had a very long discussion about what does creativity mean in artistic work once you're working with an AI. And that was the start. Then he introduced me to Kelsey. And then that's why I thought that it's nice to have this conversation with them. So who is Kıvanç? Kıvanç is here. And he's an artist technologist focusing on machine learning and artificial intelligence in the field of music and interactive arts. His research in art and technology integrates interactive arts, advanced technology, and design to create transdisciplinary knowledge. And his work has been exhibited in very interesting events like Rio Olympics 2016, Art Electronica Festival 2017 and 20, CAI 2018, Mutic Montreal 2018, Plugin Istanbul 2019, wow, okay. And then ZKM in Karlsruhe. He's currently an assistant professor in interactive AI at the Chalmers University in Gothenburg, Sweden. Who is Kelsey? Kelsey Cotton is a vocalist, artist, mover working with experimental music, musical artificial intelligence, electronic textile, soft robotic and human computer interaction. As a researcher, she is fascinated with pushing the limits of musical bodies, which has seen her recent work delve deeper into designing artifacts which harness, augment, and fuse different physiologies, both physical and digital. She's currently doing her PhD in interactive music and AI at Chalmers University of Technology. Sorry that I'm reading through this. They have so extensive experiences, I couldn't memorize it myself. So welcome to both of you. Feel free to add anything I missed.
Thank you. I think that was a great short intro.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here. And now I start the questions. So the first question goes to Kıvanç. And so I want to first start from the basics. What are the current state-of-the-art technologies in AI-based technologies that are in artistic work? And can you tell us a little bit, like shortly, if possible, what do we have there currently?
So, I was about to say that. I was like, do we have 2 days? So I'm probably, to answer that briefly, I would not go into any technical areas. Because when we say AI, there are quite a different variety of algorithms, such as deep learning, machine learning, rule-based approaches, evolutionary computation, and such. So the spectrum is quite wide, and all of that requires at least a half a day to introduce. So if we not go into the technology, but try to have a look at it from a more, as an overview, I think we could first mention what do we mean by AI technologies, and there's a little bit of misconception about artificial general intelligence and applied artificial intelligence. In my perspective, artificial general intelligence is the AI technologies. When we talk about, oh, is the AI going to conquer the world? This AI became sentient, or when we talk about these technologies having intrinsic motivations, that means that they come up with what they want to do. And artificial general intelligence looks into possibilities for such technologies in computational ways by looking into modeling, cognitive behaviors, or looking into learning mechanisms and such. So to be clear there, we don't have any artificial general intelligence technology today. It is a theory, it's a concept, and it's great as a theory and as a concept, and I think there's quite valuable contributions in that area. But on the other hand, we have applied artificial intelligence, which are more of these technologies that is doing very specific tasks, and they are geared towards or designed for carrying out those tasks. And sometimes we see systems that are combining multiple algorithms together to achieve something, such as autonomous cars. There's a camera for object recognition, and there's other systems for dealing with the driving, and they all work together. So in this talk, we are going to be talking about applied artificial intelligence. So specific technologies for specific tasks in artistic practices, to clarify first. And we are currently working at Kelsey on maybe coming up with an overview of those technologies. And we come up with this idea of tool, product, and partner approach. So we have been looking into quite a few AI approaches in artistic domains, and we noticed that some of them are used as a tool to map different domains or transform from a data from one domain into as a data into another domain. To be specific, for example, let's say we have some sensor looking into trying to recognize movement on human body, and then if we try to take that data and map it to some sort of sound synthesis parameter, then we may be using some machine learning algorithms there. Maybe when I make a fist, I want to create a certain sound or a certain type of sound. So when we do those kinds of between domain mappings, we can use AI algorithms as a tool to do that. There is other types of algorithms which we call the products. They are made through some sort of data creation and learning mechanisms, and at the end, after the training on the data set, they become this product that is either generating infinite content, and there are ways to interact with them. So we decided to call those approaches products. There have been quite a few examples of that actually recently. For example, DALL-E 2 in our conceptualization is a product because it has been trained on a data set. It has a particular aesthetics and affordances of different variety of aesthetics, but not everything, right? So it's made in a specific way. So we like to call those products. And then there is partners. For example, in music practice, there has been quite a bit of work on having autonomous algorithms playing music or interacting in a musical performance as an active partner. And they are active partner because they are communicating in the medium that the both artists are working on. In music, for example, the software is listening, or the algorithm or the machine is listening to what other performers are doing and generating sounds or performing in a musical manner, depending on what is happening at that time or what has been happening during that performance. So we like to call those types of algorithms partners. So briefly, we came up with these three types of categories, which kind of like independent of the technology, or independent of the specific AI algorithm type or kind or technology, but still gives us a brief overview of everything we think.
So then if I could imagine, because we also talk a lot in the future of work with this transition from a tool to a partner in the future of work, in the way we interact and collaborate with these systems. And in your work, I've seen that you talk about a paradigm shift in artistic work practices. And it's also, for me, interesting to know that how do you see this paradigm shift in artistic work, creative work? And do you also see a variance among these three categories, tool, product, and partner? Partner, yes.
There is a variance. That's actually a really good question. There is a variance. The tool section, the tool category hasn't been affected much because the tool types of approaches are mostly geared towards the specific artistic practice that that artist is working on, or what they would like to, you know, explore. So in most cases, it's very specific to the particular artistic practice. But we see a lot of shift in partner and product. And in terms of partner, I don't mean necessarily the musical performance area. I don't see that much of effect there, but I see more in terms of the co-creativity. So we see a lot of, you know, creativity support tools becoming more and more accessible, more and more ubiquitous, as well as partner category as well is shifting quite a lot, because we ended up with these, you know, actually in the last 2-3 years in the visual domain, we ended up with these, you know, easily accessible visual image generator products, and that became quite accessible as well, both in terms of, you know, interacting with already made and given away sort of models, but also in the sense that downloading, you know, the code, the open source code, and training your own models and making your own models as well.
So then the other question is that, so you imagine you have the company or the institution or whoever who is actually developing that AI, and then you have the people who feed this AI-based system with their data, and then you have the artist who takes this AI and then creates the new artistic work. So who are the stakeholders, and what happens to the intellectual property? Who is the creator in the end? So
that's a very good question. I think we should be mindful that in any case, there's no one genius artist making a work, right? There's so many different mechanisms involved in every work. And I think this is maybe a great time to move away from the artist as genius sort of mentality, especially with the AI algorithms, because we have a more complex scenario than one person coming up with a work. And I would argue that actually, historically, that also wasn't the case. Everybody, you know, is affected by their culture, their society, the ongoing discussions. So there's always multiple stakeholders involved in artistic works, I would say. I think at this moment, maybe it's important to look into who are those stakeholders or actors, and also what are the differences, because we should be talking about people, you know, being involved in an active manner and people also being involved in a passive manner. We also should talk about consent there as well, I think. Do I want to be involved, or am I involved without being asked to be involved? But that's a really good question. We should be looking into the stakeholders, definitely. We can't hear you.
So I was wondering, maybe it's a question to both of you. How does, so everybody knows an artist as someone with a specific talent who will create something and unique, and then which is judged by the community, which actually takes that artistic work and it takes it as the result of their own creativity. And how do you think that would change once the AI comes to play? So how does, for example, if you have the work of an artist, another artist being as the input to the AI system, and then you take that AI and then you start working with that, who is the creator of the artistic work, and is an artistic work created by a human better than the AI or the other way around, or can we talk about these sort of things then?
Yes, is the question for me or Kelsey? I got lost.
Both of you, I think like
Both
you can go in turns. Yeah.
Would you like to go, Kelsey?
I mean, sure. I'll. That's a massive question, and I'll do my best to answer it. I feel like there's a couple of different parts to that question, in regards to the social perception of value of art that is created by a human versus the social perception of art that is created by an AI. And then also there's another layer to that of the social perception of art that is created by a human who is using an AI tool, to come back to sort of our product partner tool sort of framework that Kıvanç was describing a bit earlier. I'm not sure if I have a sort of a concrete answer as to where we are headed with that, but what I can see is that there's some really interesting navigations and sort of cultural changes that are happening in how we're understanding and working with these tools. And we're still learning a lot about what we can do with them and how we can really push the boundaries. And I'm going to use the word exploit, but it's not the kind of word that I want to use, but how we can make best advantage of the technology to be able to create the things that we're wanting to create and share with people, but also bearing in mind that there are a lot of stakeholders who are also entangled with these tools. There's, as you'd mentioned earlier, Shadan, the artists who their work has formed the training of the data set, and they may not be aware that their work has been used within these models. And then someone at home may be experimenting with DALL-E 2 and generating infinite amount of content using this particular artist's aesthetic or style as a prompt. So it brings a lot of sort of really tricky things there. Is it the original artist whose work was the basis of the training data, who is also an artist in this case because they have produced an artistic work which is in some way, shape or form represented in the resultant AI generated artwork, or the person who typed in the right combination of words to generate that art, or the people who were developing the code for the model. There's so many different people who were involved in that, and it's really, really hard to sort of untangle who had the sort of the biggest thumbprint on the work, so to speak. So to say who is the ultimate single artist in an artwork that's generated through this pipeline is a little bit difficult, and I don't know if we yet have a sort of the cultural structures to be able to identify that, because we're still learning a lot about the value system that we're developing through our usage of these tools. So I'm not sure if that's like an answer to that question, or like part of it at least, but I think there's something really, really interesting going on in how it's reshaping our ideas of value and reshaping our ideas of what constitutes the creation of an artwork, which is really, really intriguing and really, really complex.
I mean, that definitely is interesting, and I have a follow-up question, but I would like to first hear also Kıvanç's answer to that.
Yeah, I would like to cover the creativity part of your question maybe a little bit. I think creativity has quite a connection to the affordances of the tools that we are using. We need to think about the affordances. So, and in that, we also need to think about who is coming up with those affordances. It's very common in AI technology that we approach these autonomous algorithms as if they just appeared and they exist as themselves without having any connections to their makers, which is actually quite a big issue in terms of responsibility. And that's also a little bit of a, how to say, that has been called out by AI ethics researchers. For example, Jonah Bryson has been publishing about that quite a lot, talking about AI, not the other I. And I share that view, and it is very clear to me that at every point of AI technology creation, there's a human being involved. If you are coming up with an architecture that's for making music, your understanding of what music is fundamentally affects what kind of architecture that you will be making. my understanding may be different than a colleague of mine who's working in, you know, early Western music. So we would come up with different types of architectures that has pretty much not so much in common. And so we need to be careful about that. We also need to be careful about the data set aspects of things. Who made each data point in the first place, and who curated those data points as well? Like, what was the process of us coming up with the data set and selecting the data for the data set? And also we should be always mindful about the culture that surrounds us, because the environment also affects our values, you know, our choices. And in that sense, I think when we talk about creativity with an AI algorithm, we should think about all these within the equation. And if you wanna again reveal who has been involved in that creative process or the creative activity, then we need to look into all these stakeholders and how they have been contributing, and maybe if they have any contribution or not towards that end product.
Yeah, definitely interesting. So my question, which is actually you also pointed to that, and I know that Kelsey is working on the topic. So it's about the ethical aspects, and also I know that you talk about also social sustainability, social and economic sustainability, if I'm not making a mistake, in artistic work with AI. And I wanted to also know a little bit more about your take on that, and then what do you think the challenges are in terms of ethical aspects of artistic work with AI?
That's another big question. I love how big these questions are.
And how limited the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm going to try my best to keep it succinct. I guess if we're breaking down the question in terms of looking at how we work sustainably with AI within the context of artistic practice and artistic work and like the arts with a capital A, I'm looking from the perspective of the mindful preservation of culture, but also bearing in mind that a lot of the implementation of AI tools that we're currently working with, they're trained on a data set, which we've discussed a lot over the course of this sort of time we've had together so far. But there's things that are included in the data set and there are things that are not included in the data set. And there are a lot of reasons as for why things are left out. But I think it's important to acknowledge in terms of cultural sustainability that there is a really significant imbalance in the amount of space, so to speak, or time or funding or research work that is being allocated or done within certain artistic genres, certain musical cultures, which can adversely impact on the kind of artwork that is being produced, because it can be overly representative of one particular practice or one particular genre or one particular ethos or aesthetic, which is something that I see as kind of problematic because it's only reflecting one side of what is an immensely rich musical and artistic and cultural world. So if we're talking about sustainability, we're also looking at a problem of, okay, if we're concentrating growth elsewhere, that means that something is going to get left behind. And that is something that I see as really detrimental to musical cultures or musical styles that are perhaps ignored. Perhaps there are regions of the world that aren't able to access the kinds of technologies that we're privileged to in certain regions and in certain spaces that would perhaps really like to, but are unable to for economic reasons, for reasons of digital access, for funding reasons. I think it's important to acknowledge that in terms of the cultural sustainability for them and being able to participate in this brave new world of AI culture that we're sort of navigating and working our way through together, this is kind of a problem. And then this also ties into sort of an ethical question of how do we manage this? How do we work in a way that we are not ignoring or leaving people out? And if the structures that we are working within are doing this, we need to look at, okay, what choices are being made in terms of how tools are distributed, how they're constructed in the first place, and how they are distributed to people to be able to access them without difficulty, and what are the big obstacles in that regard. So this is something that I see like the big sort of pillars of this particular problem, and there's a lot of little pillars as well, but these are the ones I see as the really big ones to tackle, to look at how we can make sure that we're not adversely impacting upon the growth of musical culture and artistic culture and media in general, but that we're also acting in a way that is morally right and just and ethical fundamentally.
That's a very good point, actually, and very interesting discussion. But I see a lot of questions, and my time is over for asking you questions. So I have to go to the other questions. And I know that the first one is from Michael Muller. Do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. I'm embarrassed. Yeah, I was thinking, and I had addressed this to Kıvanç, but of course I really intend it for both of you. I've read a lot of speculations about the relationship that humans might have with AI agents. In the chat, I had listed the ones that I could remember from, but it's been 6 months since I read the papers. Teammate, coach, tutor, pen pal, really, assistant, audience, and some other ones too that were, it seemed even less likely. Vera Lau and I talked about nannies. Oh, somebody wrote about nannies, in fact. And yet when we've done experiments with a conversational AI in the software engineering space inside of IBM, most of our informants said, well, it's a tool. But on the other hand, they asked the tool questions like, my favorite was, how can I get a career in machine learning? And the tool answered in perfectly formatted Python source text, while true, print, study. And so they were interacting with it very much as a social partner. And there are many examples. I just gave you that one because I hoped it would make you smile. And so you also heard about tools mostly. How did you, I think we were asking the question wrong. So how did you ask your question? And is there a way in which we can elicit from people more detailed interactional senses of their relationships with these AI agents? I guess that's my question. And it was much too long, and I apologize for talking too much.
That's a great question, actually. So first, to clarify, I myself, I didn't go and ask people about, okay, what do you name your AI? It was mostly, when I did the literature reviews, it was mostly just looking into different algorithms and trying to come up with, okay, what do they kind of mention? What do they mean in there? And it was mostly in musical domain, which is fundamentally different than the literary domain, I would say, because there's a lot of, embodied interaction. There's a lot of mechanisms that are happening internally, but it's really hard to express them in many ways. Like, for example, if you ask an improviser, what did you play the sound? They would be like, I felt like it. And so what does that mean, right? So it's quite a different domain, but I do agree with you in the sense that however we name, how we name a technology is gonna affect how we conceptualize that technology and how we put them in the culture. So one of the issues that we are actually dealing right now is the simple fact that we call these technologies artificial intelligence. And I know that quite a few researchers agree with me on that I wish we didn't. It would be so much easier for us to actually just show them explicitly what they do. What does a conversational, software do? It is trained on a bunch of conversations. Maybe if there's a recommendation coming from that software, we should look into the training data set. And, there is also like a bunch of research on that in terms of the explainable AI and such.
Yeah.
So I think because they are missing that link, it becomes more less transparent and more blurry to see where that answer is coming from. And I think that's one of the issues that we are facing right now.
Kelsey, do you have something to add to that?
The only thing I would sort of, I think Kıvanç had an amazing response and answer to your question, Michael. But the thing I would want to sort of highlight is that I think what we're trying to do with the partner product tool is to sort of look at the how something is being used, so that we can then look at, okay, how is the usage of the AI in that particular context? What is it saying in terms of social value, in terms of the enacted values or ideals of the person who's using it, and trying to sort of like peel back the onion layer by layer, because there's a lot that can sort of go missing. And I really liked the different terms that you had for how AI has been described as a pen pal is one that I hadn't heard. And that one definitely made me smile. But there's, I guess, through that, it's definitely fulfilling a functional role. But there's also a lot of really complex social entanglements with the kinds of relationships that someone is building through conversing with an AI, and the kind of the meanings that they ascribe to the kind of conversational dynamic that they are engaged with, and their perception of what it is doing in exchange as well. So I don't think I have a very straight answer or response, but I think there's a lot of like really interesting layers at play. And we're trying to sort of start from the functional and sort of work our way outwards. And perhaps there is like a really clear pathway through that. But it's definitely like messy and really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat. And Diana has written some comments. So I would just, but she left, and I see that there are not questions, rather discussions. So feel free to read them. But if you have any other questions, just simply raise your hand and unmute yourself, and then ask the question. Mark.
Yeah, I would be. I think it's all quite interesting, but so far I think we talked mostly about the relationship between the artist and the pool partner, right? When I've understood correctly, it's a little bit like you describe it like fluid. So sometimes it depends a little bit on how the system responds to me, maybe also how I interact with it. And sometimes I have the feeling I've done it, and sometimes I have the feeling that the thing done it, and then still I can pick my stuff and so on. So I think it's, as an artist, it's a little bit like of course, like a creative process, and there's somebody in it. But how is it for what do you think? How is it for the audience? I mean, do they care how it is made? I always wonder when now, I mean, about, if you think of the proliferation of you know, stable diffusion images. I mean, it's interesting that this is maybe AI made, but at the end of the day, people maybe don't even recognize it anymore and just enjoy it still for the aesthetic pleasures. Or do you think that it will always be like, you know, oh, this is not handmade? Because when you think of electronic music, like very I would say pragmatic, you like dance music, nobody really cares where it comes from, as long as I can dance to it. Or
that's a great question. Thank you, Mark. So in terms of I think your question is mainly about the audience involvement. I think I have been mentioning this actually, and I think the difference between artist and audience is a little bit becoming more vague, and that interaction is shifting, I would say, because previously what we talked about audiences, let's say in visual domain, is, you know, there's a painting and someone is looking at that painting or viewing it, interacting with it. So in that case, maybe audience is quite clear, but in the case of, let's say, DALL-E, it's not really so clear, because someone made that model, but the audience, I would say that people generating images with that model, they could be, you know, taught towards being an audience, but also not being a passive audience. You know, they are somewhere in between artist and audience spectrum, but maybe closer to the audience. But they are active in that process as well. So they are also not completely audience in the historical term. So that's why we have been talking about how this, artist audience paradigm is being broken right now. And then there's maybe a shift in those terminology as well.
But isn't that the prosumer? Isn't that?
Well, you could propose new terms for sure, but I don't think we should. Like there's creativity there as well, right? I've seen people using quite interesting entries for those algorithms and coming up with really cool things. But at the end, it also depends on how the architecture is made, the data set that it was trained on. So someone made that model and they selected a particular one out of multiple models trained. Why did they choose that one? So those are also like very important parts. So in that sense, I would say that the difference between audience and artists is becoming a little bit more vague. Maybe we need a new understanding in that sense. And it comes to the stakeholders as well. It's a new complex scenario of a variety of actors and stakeholders. So maybe the historical terminology doesn't fit to this new phenomena. And in your example of dance music, I think that was a great example as well. We should be definitely talking about transparency of AI technology usage. And I think it comes to that when you said like, well, the people dancing to it wouldn't care if it is made by AI or not. But maybe we would care if there was some sort of, capital value involved in there. The capital value in that sense, I mean, can be monetary, but doesn't have to be. There's also cultural capital as well. And, dance music has actually quite a involvement of cultural capital because it's a social gathering, and then that social part is quite important as well. So how does the autonomous technology fit there? We should maybe talk about that. But in general, also, we should talk about the transparency of AI technology being used in any practice. And I think it's a social discussion that's needed to be done now on whether we have to be exposing, or how to say, disclosing if we use an autonomous algorithm or not, or what type of algorithm that we have been using, or should we do that because industry normally doesn't share their technology, right? And they have right to do that because that is how they're making money. So I think we need a conversation there now, pretty much.
Can I just briefly comment on that? Only briefly?
Yeah.
I find it quite interesting because I came to a completely different conclusion. I would say we should not disclose because then we lose all the magic of it, of every artistic production. Because where does that come from that we need to know how things are done to appreciate them? And like I find it it's a very analytic. Yeah, you go there and now I know how you wrote this poem. I know how you did this picture. I know your technique. I know the colors you use and so on. I mean, is that actually the way we should approach artistic art, or shouldn't we just forget how it is done and just appreciate it for what it is?
That's a great comment, and it reminds me a statement made by Edward Snowden. Actually, just because you don't want to reach public data doesn't mean that we should lose access to public data. You may prefer not to know how it is being made, but it doesn't mean that you should not have access to know when you want to know. So I think that part, there's a little bit of a distinction there.
I have to cut this because, unfortunately, because the clock is ticking on the recording part of the conversation, but we can stay here and talk further and have the discussion. But before I close this, I would like to thank both Kıvanç and Kelsey for their very interesting comments, and thanks for joining us today, although I know that it was also during the being sick and so on. And yeah, thanks for being there. I really enjoyed this. So let's just...
Thanks for the invitation. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much for having us. It was really lovely.
Thank you.